Okay, cool. We're rolling.
Yeah, I'm excited for this. I think we should first introduce ourselves. I'm Nick Tappan. I did the last podcast on your YouTube channel. We talked about the book. So this is Wiley and I. We are the two official authors of The American Exile.
Yep, I'm Wiley Wagner.
And I'm Nick. Nick Tappan.
Thank you for having us, Noah.
Yeah, thanks.
Of course.
It was really fun last time we did this discussion together.
Yeah, we see all of like masks. We're in person. It's
Yeah.
a very different experience.
And the mask is slipping down slow, so I had to keep pushing it up.
It's an incredible setup.
Yeah, I know. It's really cool.
The no Rogan experience. There we go.
No Rogan, yeah.
Okay, cool. So let's start off political.
Yeah,
Do you guys want to
because-
mention anything about your book right now?
Well, I think we want to talk about the Israel-Palestine.
Sure.
Right now, since that's our last chapter in the book. I think the most challenging chapter, arguably, in the whole book.
Yeah, in the context of the UAE-Israel deal.
Yeah, so you could lead that a little more because you came up with that topic a little bit.
Yeah, do you want to do some context?
Yeah, sure, you could talk about that because, to be quite honest, I know I'm supposed to be the worldly, Model UN kid, but this is the first I'm hearing about, so maybe you could give some context about it.
Yeah, so essentially there was a joint signing ceremony between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain, and it was put together by the United States. And a lot of people have called it a peace treaty, but in reality it's more like an agreement of normalizing ties, because these countries they weren't in conflict with each other, so there's no peace being created, it's just being maintained. But so the major breakthrough is that I believe the UAE and Bahrain are the third and the fourth Arab nations to recognize Israel as an independent state after... Yeah.
I think some progress is being made in the Middle East. I think early on Trump's presidency, I remember Saudi Arabia was the first Arab country to recognize Israel's control over Jerusalem, something like that.
I think what's important about this deal, let's start with the pros of the deal, is there's, normalizing of ties. So any sort of normalizing in the Middle East is going to be good.
Because a lot of people in the U.S. and worldwide kind of have these unrealistic goals at the moment that there should be peace. A lot of people are staunchly pro-Palestine or pro-Israel. Seems like there's no middle ground, if you will. So I think the step towards normalizing ties between both countries is a good first step, because you can't just go with decades upon decades of just war and hate between Israel and Palestine, the rest of the Middle East, and then suddenly just jump towards peace and prosperity between both countries. So I really like the sounds of the deal so far, but what are some of the cons with it?
Well, I just wanted to point out one of the other pros is that businesses will be able to work together between UAE, Israel, and Bahrain. And so that's a great way to normalize ties, as we talked about in our book, is to tie their economic interests together.
Yeah, we kind of talk about a joint federation between Israel and Palestine, something like the EU, but a very preliminary, rudimentary form of the EU, where it's kind of open borders between Israel and Palestine, and that way Palestinians can come back across into the Israeli settlements and are able to repossess their property that's across the border, if you will.
Yeah, so obviously having rights for the Palestinians living under Israeli occupation is very important. And what this deal does not do is mention anything about Palestine.
Yeah.
It had no input from Palestinians.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah, but I think in the way that I think if we begin to build some support with other Middle Eastern nations, I think Saudi Arabia is kind of beginning to get on board with it, but they're not completely staunchly ready for the peace process yet. But I think with these baby steps, and Palestine will slowly be kind of compelled to come to the table and be more adaptable to some treaty propositions.
I actually disagree with that. I think seeing Israel being able to make these ties with other nations without having to give up anything towards Palestinian rights, it adds a popular incentive within Israel to not to hold out on the Palestinians because
The rest of the Middle East is kind of
yeah, like one of the main reasons why Israelis would agree to expand rights for Palestinians would be to normalize relations with other Arab nations, but now these nations are giving them those ties without any concessions for the Palestinian people.
yeah. But I think that just goes to show you that because I think in the 1970s and kind of 1960s, 70s, 80s, that the Middle East was very much a nationalistic approach against Israel. But now it's kind of we are kind of abandoning those nationalistic ties, and we're kind of going towards the economic. So as long as we could benefit economically in some way, that we're willing to kind of back away from Palestine. But back to my point when I was saying that slowly Palestine will be more compelled to accept some of the terms of treaty propositions. Is Saudi Arabia is a significant proponent of the Palestinian cause, but the fact that they recognize Israeli control over Jerusalem, that kind of shows Palestine to kind of accept the terms and kind of become more open, because Palestine obviously has its own agenda a little bit, and in the past Palestine has actually left negotiations with Israel and the U.S. And just to go for the record, I am lean more towards the Palestinian side. I do recognize Israel's sovereignty and their right to exist, but I do believe that Palestine does have some say at the table, but I don't really think it helps the Palestinian cause to kind of up and leave negotiations with the Americans and Israelis.
Yeah, but I think right now Israel needs incentive as well to come to the table with Palestine, and there's not much of that after relations are normalized between these countries.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I think we kind of exhausted that topic a little bit. Do you want to continue on with the Israel-Palestine issue, or no?
I'm okay with leaving it at that, yeah.
All right, so that was good. Let's move on. We can either talk about our protests that are happening in the U.S., or we can also talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
I think I should say the protest towards last, because that's a very complex issue.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the RBG. I think it's really sad that she passed away. She was a huge proponent of marriage equality. She was a huge advocate for progressive values on the Supreme Court. And unfortunately, with her passing, I think that all the progress we've made in a couple decades is up in peril.
Yeah, I mean, she's been a rock for so many people to lean on, even while it seems like everything else is falling apart. I mean, my friend, as everything's been happening in 2020, every time something worse would happen, she would tell me, at least we still have RBG, and now we don't even have that.
Yeah, but I was watching a CNN interview, I think from 2015, and her and Scalia, obviously, for people who don't know, is a huge conservative, huge originalist, and I believe in the Hallmark case, what was the Supreme Court case? He voted against it. He believed that sanctity of marriage was between a woman and a man. It made that very clear, but I think it goes to show you that Scalia and RBG were best friends, and amid these times of just political extremism and a lack of compromise and discussion, that just you can have a staunch originalist and a very big progressive just become best friends and are able to set aside their differences from time to time. So I think just RBG gone now, that just compromise and the need for political discourse is kind of almost evaporated at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you go back, RBG was a leader with the progressive movement, but if you go back throughout history, I think since the early 1900s, that the progressives have achieved a ton. They passed the 17th Amendment, which was a personal income tax. They've pushed forward the anti-segregation bill. They also pushed forward a lot of civil rights legislation. Now RBG is gone. I think the progressive movement is kind of slowly taking a back seat. Now, obviously, with Bernie Sanders and everything, there was a ton of support for him. But RBG was the representative of the progressive movement on the Supreme Court, and was able to stake out those policies and like kind of watched out for the progressive movement. And now with potentially a 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court, that any more progress with the progressive movement is kind of going to be halted for decades, probably.
Well, I agree that the progressive movement will likely be halted on the Supreme Court, but I think RBG can serve as a spark to kindle a greater movement within Congress and within the executive branch. And as we learned from AP Gov, there are a lot of ways that the other two branches can counter decisions by a conservative majority Supreme Court.
Yeah, there was a tweet by Ed Markey, and he's a huge progressive senator from Massachusetts. He co-sponsored the Green New Deal bill with AOC. He actually tweeted out saying that it's fine if the conservatives put another judge on the Supreme Court. He said, but then when Democrats take over, like maintain their power supposedly in the House and then take over the Senate, that they will hopefully be able to put through a bill to actually expand the number of justices to represent the support the liberal cause, I suppose. And I think that would be a great way. I think that's kind of really, truly kind of changing the fabric of the country.
So you agree with the idea of expanding Supreme Court?
Yeah, I do. Because I think Neil Gorsuch, as even said, he's another Trump appointee. He said that it's kind of undemocratic to have people's will and their freedom to live just in the hands of 9 people. So I think that should be expanded upon a little more, because I believe in the beginning of the U.S. there were 4 justices, weren't there?
I think it was 7, but
7?
yeah, or right. 5 or something.
We confirmed that.
Yeah, we confirmed that, because I remember in Marbury versus Madison there were 4 justices.
5
justices.
5. Yeah, so now we're at 9, so I don't think it's a completely radical idea. So.
Yeah.
And if the Democrats hold both the South and the House and then the Senate and potentially the presidency, then I think that's not completely out of the question.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. If the Senate had 9 members, we'd agree that was a completely undemocratic body. One proposal that I actually thought was interesting was expanding the Supreme Court to 27 justices. And you could, okay, hear me out, right?
Yeah.
Because
it's kind of crazy.
Oh, it's like 27
right.
What?
Right. So the idea is that there would be 27 members on the Supreme Court. I believe a lot of lower district courts function with a large number of judges as well. But what happens is, for each decision, a panel of 3 justices is randomly selected to rule on the case. This is what happens in lower courts.
Yeah, the federal district courts.
Yeah. And so one thing this would do is it would dilute the actual partisan infighting on the Supreme Court, because there wouldn't be a 6-3 conservative majority on every single case.
Yeah, I think that's really bad, especially with Amy Coney Barrett.
Yeah, and you can see this in the circuit court that oversees the Ninth Circuit Court, that even though it's mostly made out of progressives, there's still conservative decisions being made because of the random selection of the panels. And the other thing this would do is it would allow the Supreme Court to hear 9 times as many cases, because you'd have 9 times as many people, you have 3 times as many people deciding, 9 times as many panels on each decision, right? Yeah. And so right now, I believe the Supreme Court selects 80 out of 8,000 appeals to be heard at the Supreme Court, and this would increase that intake.
I wouldn't necessarily say 27. I think we could tone it back a little bit towards 20. But I agree. I actually strangely agree with that proposal, because I think that also invites some more moderate Democratic judges. I think that kind of represents the wider trend of a unity plan between the progressives and moderates.
Right, because the Supreme Court isn't supposed to be about Democrats and Republicans. It's supposed to be about
objectivity.
Right.
Partiality in the eyes of the law.
Legality, yeah.
I'm actually genuinely scared about the Amy Coney Barrett getting like with a 6-3, because one thing is to have just a moderate Republican, another is to have this a woman who was part of an extreme Christian group, and she went to Notre Dame Law. And one of her professors was a former advisor on the Reagan administration. And at that time, Notre Dame wanted to crank out as many conservative judges and lawyers as they could. And she's also made it very clear in a Senate hearing committee, I believe, that she's against the equality of marriage. And that's what we fought so hard to achieve. And I think that's a great hallmark of like American progressive values and of American freedom. And just the fact that she will potentially reverse Roe v. Wade just shows we're going like backwards in history.
Yeah.
I think this is relatively current to this issue and can also like lead into the election as well. Do you believe that we should have a Supreme Court justice nominated on the Supreme Court before the vote on November 3rd or after?
After.
After.
Because it's never happened in history before. The only time a justice has died like RBG was in 1864 January. I think it was October of 1864, right before the election with Lincoln, and Lincoln actually waited until after the election results to appoint. So this will be unprecedented if Trump and if the Senate actually submits Amy Coney Barrett onto the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
I think it's full of hypocrisy. You know, Mitch McConnell's reasoning for why he would do it this time and not back in 2016 was because this time around Republicans control the White House and the Senate.
Government.
Whereas back in 2016, Obama only controlled the White House and not the Senate. But his reasoning falls apart when you see that Democrats could easily take over the Senate and the presidency in 2020, this election.
Yeah, I don't think the Republicans want to admit it, but I think in a way that's kind of their sign of like post-war plans, like if Trump loses the election potentially, because I think it's really good for Democrats because you see Texas and historically very strong Democratic strongholds turning purple because so many people are making their voices heard that they don't like Trump, they don't like his race baiting in a way, they don't like him playing on racial division. So I think the Republicans are kind of scared, like, oh my God, like the Democrats could win. I think we need to we need to take advantage of this moment just to maintain Republican interest and just to ensure that there's not a complete takeover by Democrats. So
yeah, I think that makes sense.
that's like an implication, if you will, that they kind of recognize that Trump's slowly losing.
It's been their long game for essentially this whole...
Yeah, that actually brings us to the next topic about the presidential race. Who do you think is going to win?
Well, I don't want to make a prediction, but if I were to bet on it, I would bet on Joe Biden winning.
Yeah, I would say that as well. Because I was reading a report that in the 2016 election, there was a lot of forces. A lot of people say, oh my God, how did Hillary Clinton lose the election? But I kind of knew at the time that Trump had a very good chance at winning, because if you look at independents in 2016 overwhelmingly supported Trump, and now independents overwhelmingly support Biden. And at that time, Hillary Clinton had a scandal against her. She had emails against her, and Trump kind of used that as a bludgeon to use against her in the election. And now Trump has the scandal with coronavirus, and he has a lot of his hypocrisy.
Yeah, I think there will be a lot of unpopularity about the Supreme Court nomination.
Yeah, and Trump leads voters. Trump leads voters by 7 points with the economy, because showing that voters kind of have some faith that Trump will do better in the economy than Biden, but in every other category like race relations, COVID, Biden leads by at least 10 points.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of scared also because in Arizona and Florida, Biden loses by like 1 to 2 points. So that's a very tight race between those two states. But even then, Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are leaning towards Biden. So if Biden secures those states with all the other Democratic strongholds, then I think Biden has a genuine chance of winning the election.
That's all he needs to win. And then we're seeing polling from 538 that has Biden up even in Ohio.
Yeah, that Trump won last time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think in those Rust Belt states, Trump promised, I think that kind of plays into his climate change stance about bringing coal back and bringing jobs back into the Rust Belt as well. But again, you see that in the white Appalachia with Kentucky and West Virginia, and then he actually wanted to cut out the committee, a joint committee, and with private businesses to actually provide jobs in the area, and he wanted to cut that. But again, besides that point, people in those in the Rust Belt potentially feel that Trump didn't necessarily deliver those promises, that there wasn't this massive job growth from like promised.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Well, is there anything else we'd like to add to this topic?
Well, I think we wanted to talk about the protests.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because we wanted to say that at the very last, because that's so what are your opinions on some of the protests? Because I think there's a distinction. I think the media is kind of a very big antagonist in a way, because they kind of clump the riots and then the protests together, and if you are against either of them, then you are just inherently a racist. So I think the media kind of needs to change its direction by making a clear distinction between the protests and the riots. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with that. There was this great book called Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, and she talked about how the media really changes the way we look at people of color in this country.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
For example, white people make up 66% of the population living under the poverty line. But in the news, whenever they portray a poor person, it's only white 16% of the time. Whereas for African Americans in this country, they make up 27% of the population below the poverty line, 25%, something like that. But in the media, when they portray
most of the time it's a minority.
A poor person, yeah, a majority of the time, they're African American.
Yeah.
And what I think there's a similar effect going on with the riots and the protests, is the news doesn't really want to show the peaceful protests. They want to see the fire and the action, and so it's clumping. It's tying the riots to the Black Lives Matter movement, which I think could. Yeah. It muddies the water for a lot of people's perception of the movement.
Yeah, well, you tend to see on NBC News and then CNN, they show the riot police coming out and clearing out peaceful protests for Trump's photo op, and then Fox News shows the violent protesting. Oh, this is what the Black Lives Matter radical left Democrats won, and it just shows that division, and I think that also kind of de-incentivizes the political discourse, and because I see with my family, there's me and then one of my grandmas who listens to Fox News 24/7. So yeah, so I think that's very scary. So I think the media needs to just make a distinction between the protests and then the riots, and immediately if you're a peaceful protester that throws a brick into a building and causes any property damage, like, you are no longer a peaceful protester, you are a rioter, and you need to be prosecuted. So, after just our thoughts with the protests, what do you think are some solutions to cutting down? Because I know with the Black Lives Matter, there's been defunding the police, and then with some moderate Democrats, they want to kind of reallocate resources within the police, and then implement implicit bias tests. So, what are some thoughts for the police brutality issue?
Yeah, I agree with those. I agree with allocating funding away from the police departments. Like, I'm sure we've all heard the arguments, like, police are being sent in to deal with all sorts of things when it would be better for social workers, psychologists, other activist groups which do not get the funding that they need at all.
So you do support defunding the police?
Yeah.
Well, I think this is where the discussion gets a little interesting, because I'm against defunding the police, because there have been some cases, because in Camden, New Jersey, a lot of proponents of defunding the police have said, well, Camden police was defunded, and then they're more integrated into the community, but truth was behind that, that the mayor of Camden County actually created another police force and took funding away from the Camden police and put it towards that. So there were more police than there were actually fully realized, and then that actually caused a decrease in the crime.
But I believe the belief in Camden was that you would basically recreate the police department from the ground up using these new hiring methods and using these new implicit bias testing, better training, so that it would be, it wouldn't lead to these obvious excesses of police power that we're seeing around the country.
There was a poll by Gallup I saw, and and I believe 92% of African Americans say that there needs to be some action taken on police brutality. However, I was really shocked by it because there were about 81% of African Americans that say that there should be the same police presence or more police presence in low-income neighborhoods than there are already. Because I actually had this discussion with my friend Jeremiah, who helped edit our book, and he said that kind of makes sense in a way, because he's with you, he believes in defunding the police, but he said because there was a case in Detroit when there was a domestic disturbance call, and the police came 2 days later. So I think the media, in a way, like we talk about how the media is a big antagonist with this issue right now, but I think the media doesn't necessarily portray the African Americans that want greater presence of police in their neighborhoods.
Yeah. Would you support more funding being put into like social working groups?
When people say we should defund the police and put it towards social services, I don't think that's as utopian as it sounds, because we see with a lot of government agencies are horribly mismanaged. I think trying to get in hand with a social service worker or a social service group would be a nightmare versus the police. I think we are way better off with reform the police as it is. There have been some solutions about setting up a national registry for police that have committed a lot of offenses like police brutality. So because there was a report by Yale, and they showed that a lot of the police brutality issues are perpetrated because police from one county actually are transferred to another county. So having that registry when they're being evaluated for applications, that's on their record, and they know that they recognize that there have been a lot of there has also been a discussion between Republicans and Democrats. They come to the table to actually review abridging qualified immunity, not getting rid of it, because qualified immunity in the first place was made to build a connection between a reasonable action in reasonable context. So just to give you an example, so if a guy has hands up and the police had their guns drawn, and the guy went for a gun supposedly, but it looks like a gun, they don't know what it is, and the police fire, qualified immunity would dictate that was reasonable. However, just based on so many Supreme Court cases and a lot of decisions in the appeals system, that qualified immunity has become so inflated and so bloated that issues like the Rodney King in 1993, I believe, and then Eric Gardner have gotten away with that, even though that was clear police brutality. So I think a decision there needs to be discussion between Democrats and Republicans to actually find ways to abridge qualified immunity. And then there are webcams as well.
Yeah, I don't think I'm qualified enough to talk about qualified immunity. And
yeah, but I don't think necessarily defunding the police is the best idea now. I think ultimately we could discuss that, but at this point I'm a liberal. I'm more of a reformist. I believe that we should reform some systems rather than believing that the system itself is the problem. So I think that also, especially with the hallmark presidential race, I don't think Democrats should be saying we should defund the police, because that would freak some moderates out.
right, I think saying defund the police is a bad way to phrase it, right? Because you're not just taking money out of the system in its entirety. You're just reallocating the resources.
Yeah.
So the police would still be able to act in law enforcement. There's just situations like domestic disputes where a different group would be more effective than the police.
Or is it allocating more resources towards social work because I said that that could be kind of mismanaged in a way because we have a very utopian perspective of that? Or do you believe that that rather more of a combative training within the police system, that we should allocate more de-escalation and really emphasize the fact that violence and force is a last resort?
Well, I would support both of those.
Yeah. Well, so do you want to talk about anything else with it? Well, what are your thoughts with the Breonna Taylor? Because I know that first caught steam with social media, now it's national news.
Yeah, I don't think.
Yeah. There was, I was reading that there was a neighbor that said, oh, the police announced themselves, but there were among 10 other neighbors that said they couldn't hear the police announce themselves. And even one of the 10 people that said, oh, I heard them, later recanted and said, well, they weren't sure if they heard it or not. And I think it's quite hypocritical, to say the least, that Breonna's boyfriend shot the gun first, and the police, like, it's reasonable the police shot him just once, but they shot him 8 times. And there were bullets that literally went out of the house. That's complete overkill. I don't know how that wasn't brought up in court to some extent.
Yeah, I just can't believe. I can't believe how they decided on that.
Yeah. And I have some members of my family that say, oh, well, well, he kind of brought onto himself. He, like, the boyfriend shot first. I'm like, then why do you have guns in your house in the first place? You say that's your Second Amendment right for self-defense, so that's kind of counterintuitive in a way to make that argument for the Second Amendment, but yet argue that Breonna's boyfriend brought the fault onto himself upon shooting the gun.
Exactly. I think no-knock warrants in the first place are an overreach of
Well, now it's coming
state
out.
power.
Yeah, well, amid everyone so emotional with the Breonna Taylor case, there's actually evidence coming out now that the police faked the warrant and went through some dubious legal ways to obtain that warrant. That would be really bad. And
Right.
that would just only kind of strengthen the protests more for change. I think, ironically, Libertarian Rand Paul, actually, from Kentucky, from the Louisville area, actually co-sponsored the bill for the no-knock warrants.
Exactly. I don't see the protests ending anytime soon. I don't think they should end anytime soon until justice is received. Exactly. I think the October surprise that we're going to see this year, the surprise is, among many people, is that the protests will be still going stronger than ever.
I think Trump's response to that also really sparked, because amid the protests there was a significant spike in voter registration as well. So people are fully realizing that lives are on the line, people's livelihood and their futures are on the line with this presidency. And I think the protests in a way are great, because people are coming to realize that our participation, our democracy actually is meaningful, that we're no longer going to just focus on, because I think also because people ask me what my opinion was about the 2016 election, and as much as I don't like Trump, I do believe that he was necessary, and just hear me out, because he was such a controversial figure, and he passed so much controversial reform that people were kind of forced to come to the table, talk about what he was doing, and unconsciously they got involved in the democratic process. Because before, people said, oh, there are reasonable people. There's John McCain, and then there's Obama. There are 2 reasonable, good, and well-intentioned men. So we'll kind of let them do their own thing, and I have to get back to my work. And then with Trump, that kind of just turned all that sentiment with with a lack of participation upside down.
Yeah.
And I think the realization that by 2040, very well, the majority of the American populace would be minority-based also kind of forces Americans to come to the table and have discussions about race relations, because if Trump just kind of pushes that down and kind of stokes the fire more, like by 2040 we'll be in complete chaos and complete anarchy if we don't actually have meaningful discussion and pass meaningful public policy reform. by 2040 potentially.
I just think it's insane to have a democratic process where, in order to get people, in order to increase turnout, people need to be threatened by an authoritarian, essentially, an
Yeah.
authoritarian government. And it's not the fault of the people, right? There's a lot of measures in place that are keeping people from voting.
Yeah, didn't Trump say in North Carolina that you should go vote, and then go to the voting ballot? Like,
Yeah, you should attempt to vote twice.
yeah, and I know some people that say, oh, well, what Trump meant by that. That's what a lot of Trump supporters say.
Yeah.
But what Trump meant by that, like, not the fact that he said, if just to ensure that their vote actually counts in, like, twice, like, that's completely going against, like, the democratic integrity. Like, you can't just, like, twist everything Trump says, because by the time that Trump has completely morphed this country into his vision with chaos, that you can't say, oh, what he meant by that. Like,
Oh, Donald Trump didn't say to drink bleach. He said to inject it into your veins with the supervision of a doctor.
and then every doctor is like, yeah, it's not a good idea. Please don't do that. I don't know if you saw the NBC interview where there was an official that said, oh, yeah, we need to take, about the California fires. He said it was a vegetation issue. And
Yeah.
the guy's like, no, it's a global climate change issue. Like, you need to take a stance on that. And Trump's like, and the official kind of passive-aggressively said, kind of laughed and said, I wish science agreed with you. And Trump says, well, I don't think it does. Like, dude, seriously, like, California's burning to the ground. And a lot of my friends about the car sales, like the ban with gas car sales by 2035, they were like, oh, it's so stupid, like, it's kind of monkey. And I'm like, but thank God, a state like this, like the sixth largest economy in the world is taking these steps. Like, seriously, we need to take this action, you know?
Yeah, I still think that is too little too late, but I think it is an impetus to start enforcing stronger climate decisions.
Yeah, I am, because I think earlier on with our book, I was kind of iffy about the Green New Deal. I said, well, there are some legal, counterintuitive measures that kind of make my support iffy, but now I'm fully in support of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, regardless, so climate change is like one of the biggest threats we've ever faced. But even among the biggest threat we've ever faced. But even among all of these oil executives, all of these people who either believe in it but don't care because they just want to make money or they think it's a hoax, even they have to realize that at some point oil and coal will be the industries of the past. And this is why you have oil companies from Europe investing billions of dollars in renewable energies so that they can dominate the markets, and we can have these huge job programs, a lot of jobs being created by renewable energies.
In my family, like, not in my close family, but there are some family friends that are big Trump supporters, and they say, oh, we don't like AOC, we don't like the Green New Deal, that's too radical, like, that's bad for the economy. By bringing them up the point, I'm like, well, what are low taxes going to do? Like, low taxes are not going to prevent us all burning up and dying. Low taxes are not going, because it's not necessarily their fault. They're brought up with Trump and low taxes in this despotic cult of profit, because they very well know marine life, the environment are dying, but they believe that that's the only way for profit. So I think that they need to be. They also bring up the point that, well, how much money are we going to lose if global climate change continues to wreak havoc across the world? Like, by 2030, it's estimated that the agricultural industry is going to lose $3 trillion. So I think with economic growth and with the Green New Deal, that money can be saved, and we will it's not necessarily radical, because we'll be saving so much money from complete destruction if we just continue down this path.
Yeah.
I think India has also made the commitment to have zero emissions by 2035, and if India, like a developing country, like with oil, beginning to recognize that they need to go back, like, there's no excuse for the U.S. too.
And I believe China pledged carbon neutral by 2060.
Yeah, I think there are some towns in Manchuria, villages in Manchuria, that are 100% renewable energy.
Yeah.
So we turn to you, Noe. What else do you want to talk about?
So I think we should move from like a global standpoint to a local standpoint. You want to talk about school, online, COVID?
Yeah, I just generally think it sucks.
It
But,
really sucks.
Yeah, but I think just beyond our own individual choices and our individual desires, we need to look towards the utilitarian point of view that it's for the greater good. And I believe Noe and I want to have both a graduation, and if we go back to school, potentially there could be a spike and we're back inside, and then it's all done. We don't have a graduation. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely safer. It's definitely worth it to take all of these precautions. But I just think it's,
Wrong place, wrong time.
we're seeing like countries in Europe going back to school because they took the proper precautions early on. And it just seems like while this is completely necessary in the situation we are in right now, it seems like this whole situation could have been avoided.
I think with the current schedule we have, I hold a very unpopular opinion about this relative to like high schoolers in Carlsbad. That I think the online system with the periods and everything is a great way. Of course, it's like a brilliant system for online, like with the circumstances. Of course, there are some like going back to period 1 or periods 4 on Monday and Friday respectively is kind of controversial. Like, I'm against that, but I think it's a brilliant system that's been developed. And I think the other COSD proposal was to go back once a week for 50 minutes, and then the rest of the week would just be 20 minutes of classes, just like a Q&A of what questions you have. And I'm like, that's so stupid. That's in-person version of what we had in spring. Like, that's not a genius way to kind of go back to school. And my friends were like, oh, it's better than nothing. No, it's not. Like, it's still contact. Like, it's still, like, I'm not going to go back to school, wake up early for a 50-minute class, and then just nothing else. And if you just don't have anything else, like no in-person class, if you will, online or actual in-person, if there's no incentive to work because everyone just procrastinates towards last minute.
So regarding school, what's your opinion on all clubs going back, as well as contact sports such as football and soccer?
Football. I think some sports like tennis is like not
Tennis
an
is
issue.
easy. We don't have to worry
there's
about
no.
that.
But I,
yeah.
But I think the sports need to be more adaptable to having more time throughout the day. Like because Mrs. Mill, I think, brought up the point that boys soccer and girls soccer would be on the same field. Like no. Like you need to either do it after school at some point, not at the same time. There's no you can do it at the same time because like they want to limit contact with sports, but yet they're throwing a ton of people on the same field. Like, come on, really? Like, you're really going to do that? I think the clubs are a great way. I think Model UN is that would be great, but I think most of our work right now are updates and everything that's kind of online.
Let's move on. What do you think of Sage Creek Senior Assassins? Any comments on that?
I think it's great. Obviously, people are taking the safe measures. Social distancing, not getting right up on people is great. I think there are some issues with some of the planning because, like, the organizers, I think, are part of the Senior Assassins, and like some of my friends have brought up that that's a conflict of interest. Like, you should be impartial, like kind of out.
Nick, can you check the monitor? Give me your hand.
Oh man, Nick.
You're out.
Gosh, damn it! Are you kidding me? No, you're not. Were you seriously my assassin?
Yeah, it says it.
The email's right
Are
there.
you kidding me? Wait. Oh my god. Yeah, I told you that's a conflict of interest.
Yeah, you totally called it when we.
Yeah, no, when you were out of the room, damn it, I don't know what I'm going to tell my partner. Damn it.
Yeah. Okay.
Wait, so is it just my partner, or is it
Now it's just your partner.
just my partner? Oh.
Yeah.
Well, at least we're still in the game, okay. Oh my god, okay, I told you it's conflict of interest. You can tell my white face is getting red now. It's like upset. When you left the room, I told Wiley. I told him I'm like I don't have my floaty. I know he's it, and he's like, oh, that would be so funny if he throws a water balloon at your face like in the middle of a podcast. I'm like, oh, I don't know. I'm taking my chance.
Yeah, now we can have more podcasts without the impending death.
Yeah, I can say I'm very relieved to not be in Senior Assassins anymore.
Well, I just think we're in the floaty. I constantly would see myself outside without the floaty. I'm like, oh, well, great. Like, you guys could get me.
I'm sorry, Nick.
No, why do you do that? Like, I thought like the podcast was supposed to be impartial, like, safe space.
Yeah. Let's move on. Closing.
Well, I have a quick question about the Senior Assassins. I know this is. Okay, so are people that are out able to still help out, or they're just after dead?
So they're dead, but they can still help their partners out. You can like drive people over if you're just kind of dead, you know.
Oh.
You can still like help people and give people information.
Oh, okay, good.
So meaning you should probably text Carrie and maybe
Yeah, my eulogy.
Yeah.
Damn it, Wiley. Damn it,
tell
Noe,
her-
I had trust in you. I told you it's a conflict of interest.
tell her to not go out within the next 3 hours.
Why?
Remember, I have a partner too.
Okay. Oh yeah, okay, that kind of ruined like the hype of the podcast. No, like wait, no, and you pour the water on me, I look at the email, I'm like, oh, damn it.
Okay. Post something. I don't know. Let's see. What do we want to discuss next podcast?
Well, just leave it. I would leave it up to the viewers to leave it in the comments or
Yeah.
whatever. If they like the political stuff, they could leave it in the comments, and we could talk about it and do our research or whatever and talk about it.
Yeah, if there's anything that like any of the viewers want to hear about or like have us discuss, yeah, drop it in the comments. Anything like maybe new segments we should try, let us know.
Sounds
And
good.
I think is that pretty much it?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that was a great podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The vast majority of it was about politics, but yeah.
All right. That's a wrap. You guys still round of applause.
That was exciting.
Well, yeah, I'm not giving you a round of applause. You.
Oh my god.
I
I'm stopping the
trusted you.
recording.